Hello, hello. Welcome back, everybody, to another Bolt Premium Customer Workshop. I'm William Sayer, the Customer Enablement Lead here at Bolt, and joining us on our call, we have Erica. Erica is one of our customer success engineers, and together we'll be taking you through this workshop today. Super excited. Welcome for all of those of you who it's the first time. Welcome back, those of you who are joining us again. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The way this usually works is it's a 1-hour workshop. I'll be presenting, I'll be sharing stuff on the screen. If you have any questions at any points along the way, you should see there's comments on the right-hand side where you're able to ask any questions. Erica has the ability to display them on the screen. I'll do my best to answer them if they're relevant to what we're teaching at the time. If not, then Erica will just do her best to answer them in the chat. So yeah, great. It's almost time to get started. If you want, feel free to introduce yourself in the comments, say exactly where you're dialing in from. I see we've got Paul saying hello from Mexico. We've got someone, Carmel from Sacramento, Danny from, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Curacao. Excuse my pronunciation. Anyway, I see a lot of people joining us, so feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Also, if you'd like to share a project that you've been working on, say you've just gone live with it, feel free to drop a link to that. At the end of the workshop today, we may have some time to open up the floor. If you guys want to share what you've been building on, we may give the opportunity to 1 or 2 people to just spend a minute or two presenting what they've built. So with that all covered, I think we're just about ready to jump into the workshop. So today we have a super exciting one. This is, it enables a whole bunch of features, well, capabilities within Bolt. And of course, I'm sure you're all familiar with copy and paste, how that works on a computer. Effectively, what we'll be using today is we'll be using the GitHub MCP connector, and we'll be using that so that you can extract all sorts of things from other code spaces. So whether it's something as small as an icon, if it's a whole component, or even if it's an entire feature written in a different programming language, we'll still be able to use the agent to extract those features from other GitHub projects and bring those into your Bolt project. So it really enables a lot. One of the coolest things about it is if you're building a variety of different projects and you spend a lot of time building out a really nice component, say, for example, like a date picker, or you build a really nice working sidebar or anything like that, instead of having to rebuild that in your next project, you can simply transfer them from one project into the other, and then you're ready to go. And the Bolt agent does a great job of integrating it into the new code base. So that's what we'll be working on today, and we'll be going through a variety of different examples. So let's just have a quick look at this. We'll cover what MCP is, just in case you're unfamiliar with it. So basically, MCP integration between Bolt and GitHub. We call them connectors here within Bolt, but it's powered by Anthropic's Model Context Protocol under the hood, which they released about just over a year ago. It was very cutting edge at the time, and now a whole bunch of organizations have adopted it. It's basically a framework for agents to speak to a data source. So the Bolt agent itself can now speak to your Notion database, Linear, Jira, Sentry, whatever it may be, any other application. They have their own proprietary data structures. It's basically this universal language where the Bolt agent can then just speak to that, and that application will give Bolt what it requested via tools. So we'll be looking over exactly how to get this set up. Okay. Now, the connector lets Bolt see public repositories in a way it sees your project files. It can list trees, read sources, pull code, all from a single chat prompt. So these are some of the tools it can do. What we're going to be doing, the specific examples in this project are some of these ones here. And then let's have a look at the protocol. So we'll as I said, MCP, it's the standard that lets Bolt talk outside the system. GitHub, Figma, Linear in a uniform way. Connector is basically the specific MCP integration. So we'll be setting that up within Bolt. And then a repository is basically a code space saved within GitHub. Okay, now there's a few important things to cover before we dive in. Now, think of this as like a two-step process. So first, you're going to do the reconnaissance with the Bolt agents in plan mode. And that's where you're asking it to look into the repository, learn what it needs to learn about it, discover the important parts, determine what's irrelevant. And then once it's understood that and it's created a plan for you, that's when you step onto the next part, which is where you're going to do the extraction, and you're going to pull that specific code out and write that into your existing code base. So I like to break it down as a two-step process like this using plan mode, because otherwise, you're sort of firing Bolt off. It can do unexpected things because there's a lot of code that if it's dealing with a large repository, sometimes it may pull in unnecessary parts. So it's nice to break this down and understand the planning that the Bolt agent goes through along the way. Now, another thing that's important for you to consider before you're extracting is that you can, I guess, first of all, is you can either do it from your own projects. If you create a Bolt project and then connect that to a GitHub, you make a GitHub repository out of it. Of course, because you made that code, you can always bring in these components however you'd like. However, if you're choosing an open source project, which you're grabbing a repository from anywhere else on GitHub, on the internet, it's important for you to understand that there are licenses associated with these. So there are sort of three different categories of license. So the low risk, which is very permissive, such as the MIT license, Apache 2.0, and BSD, has minimal restrictions. It basically means that you'll need to just sort of reference them. And at some point, on your website, just say, hey, we've used code from this repository, but it lets you use it in free use. Then the BSL, the business source license, each sort of license will come with their own terms. And this usually isn't too much of a risk in the early stages. A lot of the time, they'll let you operate and use their source code for free until, for example, you're making $5 million in revenue. That's just one example. All these licenses can be different. And if you do find some code from a BSL license and you bring it into yours, it does add this importance for you to audit how much revenue you're making, because sometimes you can silently creep over their limitations. And if you do, that exposes some legal risks. So make sure if you are using a BSL license, you're very aware of what their expectations are with you compensating them. If, a lot of the times at some point it'll be free until a certain amount. And then once, say, you're earning 5 million revenue, which is a great problem to have for a lot of us, then perhaps you need to pay up some licensing fees. And then the final category, AGPL version 3, GPL v3, basically says that if you use any part of their code whatsoever, even if it's just a few lines, and you bring that into your project, you can now no longer monetize your project, and you need to make it open source. So you share the rest of your source code with the rest of the community. And the point behind these licenses is they don't want their code to be kind of held behind some proprietary system where you're an organization, a company earning money from the code that they wrote. They're specifically writing code to allow people to openly use it and whatever they contribute to use it as well. So just be very careful here that even if you've taken a few lines of code from somebody else, if it's in this high risk category, then that potentially exposes your entire code base, because now you'll have to share that as well. So I wouldn't recommend using that if you're trying to monetize your app in any way.
Will, we've got a question. I'm going to pause you right there.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to show these on the screen. I'll read them out for you. Doesn't it make your code vulnerable to cyber attack if you show what your code base has? And then additionally, do you have to share it publicly or only in a limited distribution space?
Yeah, good question. So to answer that first one tonight, doesn't it make your code vulnerable to cyber attack if you show what your code base has? Very good question. The answer is, if you've set up the right security policies, then no. For example, there's a whole variety of open source projects that are out there. For example, you may have heard of OpenClaw. That's probably the most popular GitHub repository of all time by now. That's completely open source. So they show all the source code. But especially when it comes to like the web domain, that will be the code that your that your users are running. So you may have server functions as well on that is kind of held behind the server, and they will have access to, if you're making API calls to an LLM and you've got like your system prompt in there, and that's as a server function, something like that doesn't get exposed when you're open sourcing your project. But think of the code when you're putting it like open source here is basically the plumbing. It's like the architectural drawings of a house and the plumbing, the electricity, how everything connects, how the whole thing functions. But just because I know the architectural, drawing and plan of a house doesn't mean I can get in. I'll still need a key if I want to get into that house. So maybe that's a good analogy you can think about. And then the second one, I think it was about sharing it publicly. So I assume that question is specifically talking to this high risk category. And my understanding, worth doing a little bit more research, but my understanding is that yes, if you do use any of these licenses, then you need to open source your code. These other two, it's not necessary. You don't need to. So I hope that helps. All right. So part one is the MCP, Model Context Protocol connector setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump into this Bolt project. This is an example blog site that I've set up ahead of time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the full process. So at the moment, if we want to come into our connectors, we basically just, as I did here, I'll just open our project settings and we come into connectors. You can see some of the ones that I've already got set up. So what I'm going to do for the course of this demo is I'm just going to disconnect this current GitHub connector. So if you ever need to disconnect, just clicking these three dots here and disconnect is how you do so. Great. So now you can see our GitHub connector is disconnected. Okay. All right. So another thing that I'm going to do is let's come into GitHub itself. I'm going to go into my settings and developer settings. I'm going to just breeze through this super quickly because I'm just showing you the disconnection process to start off with. So I'm going to delete my personal access token just so I can show you how to set this up entirely from scratch if you've never done it before, because there's a two-step process to go through. So jumping back into our Bolt projects, now we've disconnected the GitHub connector and we've also deleted our personal access token. So we're ready to go. Now come in, project settings, come down into connectors, and we're going to select GitHub here. So once we do so, it'll open up a page like this, and it's as simple as you'll just click connect. And now notice it's asking us for our API key to connect to GitHub. A lot of the other connectors that you'll use won't actually ask you for an API key. It'll be a simple OAuth flow. So you'll click something else, it'll open a window, you'll say confirm connection, and it'll be fine. GitHub is perhaps probably the most complicated of all of these to set up. So coming back into GitHub, let's just go home. So imagine here you are in your GitHub account. Now, if you've never used GitHub before, no worries. They're free accounts. You can go in, open a free account. And once you've done so, come in. We're going to go into our settings. So we just click our avatar on the top right, click settings. You'll see all of our settings. What I'm going to do is scroll down to the very bottom where it says developer settings. Let's click here. And we're going to then click on our personal access tokens. So we'll click on that. And now we're going to click fine-grained tokens. So here we go. And we can generate our new token. So we're just going to click this button here, generate new token. I'm just going to call this Bolt Workshop. Now we can set our expiration. I'm going to say no expiration because I want to continue to use this. We can see GitHub strongly recommends you set an expiration. So it depends how secure you feel about setting it up. Maybe it is best, as GitHub recommends, to do a shorter one. So up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with here. Then I'm going to say I'm going to allow access to all of my repositories. Again, if there are some that are super private or in with another organization and maybe you don't want to share them, then feel free. You can just come in and just select the repos, but I'm going to do all. And then I'm going to hit add permissions. Now here, I think there's about 30 or so. You could pay close attention to the important ones. I feel fairly comfortable giving my API key over to the Bolt agent. So I'm just going to go through and check all of these because I'm happy with my Bolt agent being able to do all of these permissions within GitHub. Great. So with those, we're now going to go generate token. Okay. So new personal access token, this will be created and then grant all these permissions. And then I'm going to go generate token. So I'm going to copy this. And with that copied, I'm going to come over into here and I'm going to paste that. Now, be careful not to share that with anybody. I know, fortunately, the window was a little bit smaller, so it kind of cut off some of the keys, so I'm not too concerned. But yeah, make sure you don't share this with anybody. And then once you do so, click connect. I'll go through, and here we go. Our GitHub is now connected. All right, so we can see all of the tools that we have enabled, and we've got 40 tools. So basically, we can create a branch, we can create new repositories, delete files, get commits, all sorts of things. Basically, everything you can do in GitHub, a lot of them you can now do directly with the Bolt agent. So with that, there's one other suggestion I will make. I'm going to come into edit. And basically, if you want to edit some of these tools, you can always do that. I usually, for here, auto-enable for all projects. And this basically means when you start a new project or you're looking at an old one, will it automatically enable your GitHub MCP? And now, what happens is if you do leave it enabled, sometimes the agent may think that it's relevant to go look through the GitHub MCP, even when it's not. So often the agent will gather as much context as it thinks it's necessary and then act on what's important. So this can use more tokens than you had planned to, or more tokens than are necessary. So what I like to do is actually turn off auto enable for all projects, and then I'll save my changes. And basically what that means is when I come down to the bottom left here, this is where we can custom toggle each of the connectors. Notice that GitHub, because we just connected it, it's now enabled. But if I was to open a new project, then by default, this should be disabled. And I recommend only turning it on when you actually need to use the connector itself. So there we go. We've now got it connected. Great. So what that means is our Bolt agent here now can look through all of our GitHub repositories. It can double click into the file structure, understand like down to the very last lines of code in any single of the repositories, which is seriously, it's like a big unlock for what we're able to now bring into this project. So let's jump back into here. We've done our MCP setup. Connect the GitHub connector. We've done that. So now we're ready to basically paste or bring another repository into this. And remember, as I said, let's inspect it. We're going to use plan mode to basically look into some of these repositories before we do so. Now, what I did beforehand is some of you guys probably have X accounts. It's a great way for product builders to share what they've been working on. If someone open sources a new library, has a good chance of going viral on here. So what I did for my research is I actually used Grok, and I asked, what are some good open source GitHub repositories for icons or date pickers or any sort of components that you would like? And I think X has a really good understanding, because when someone has like a repository, they may not share it on, they may not make a website, and Google may not index it. So I find that that Grok itself has a good awareness of, and it's up to date of what people are sharing. So that can be a good resource for you to find these repositories. So let's have a look at some repositories I found ahead of time. Now, here's one called Ion Icons. You can see it has 18,000 stars, so good amount of stars. We can see 2,000 people have forked it. We can scroll down, we can see the language that it's written in, so mainly TypeScript, which is great. And then it says it's got 1,300 icons crafted for web, iOS, and Android desktop apps. We can, using their README file, we can then actually look at like their website that they've created as well. And they've got all these gorgeous icons. So we can basically have a look at these. And now say we wanted to bring some of these icons into our Bolt project. What we can do is sorry, let me just jump back into the GitHub repo. The first thing that we're going to do is, once we've found a repository that we're happy with, we're then going to click fork. And fork basically clones, it creates your own version of the existing repository. So basically, think of all of their code. Say they've got 5,000 lines of code in their repository. You're now duplicating that. So you've got 5,000 lines within your own GitHub account. And then say they go in and then they modify their version. They add another 200 lines of code. They've now got 5,200. Your fork is basically a copy from that repo at that point in time. So you will have that original 5,000 lines of code. So it basically just creates a version of what they had at that point in time. And if it was working at that point in time, you now have a full working version. If they go and make updates, your working version should still stay working and still the same. So if you create any dependencies on this, if they rename some of their files or whatnot, that won't cause a problem to the fork that you've created. Okay, so if we ever want to see our forks in GitHub, let me just show you what I've got. We can come in here, go into repositories. We can then click on my forks and we can see all of the forks that we've created. Notice in testing, I actually have already created this. So what I'm going to do is I should be able to just delete this fork or delete this repository. So I'm just going to delete this so I can show you how to fork it again. Just got to type the name. Great, so I've deleted that, which means if we come back in here, this is the Ion icons. We're going to now click fork by default. So it's adding it to my profile and it's using Ion icons. It's available and let's create fork. Forking. Great. So now we can see here it is, Ion icons within our project, within our GitHub account. Great. So now that that's all done, let's come back into Bolts. And what we can do is here is our example blog page. What I'm going to do first of all is because exploring GitHub repositories can sometimes use a fair amount of context. I'm going to clear the context first just so it can work with as much context as possible. Let's make sure that our GitHub connector is now on. And what I'm going to say is using the GitHub connector, please look into my repo called Ion icons. So I'm referencing it by name, trying to be as specific as possible. Please extract 100 icons from this GitHub repository and add them in a new section underneath the newsletter email capture section on the landing page. So let's put it in plan mode. So it'll go in explore mode and it's going to go off and have a look in that, that fork and it's going to come back to us. So let's send off that prompt.
Got some questions, Will.
Yeah, sure.
Good breaking point. One from Mike, since using GitHub MCP uses more tokens when enabled, should we wait until we are done working on a project before enabling it, or should we enable it from the start if we want to use Git?
Yeah, good question. So firstly, just as a little caveat to what I said before, is most of the time it shouldn't use more tokens. If the agent somehow triggers some thinking process and it thinks, actually, I need to use the GitHub connector, then it will. So by leaving it enabled most of the time, it shouldn't use tokens unless it has some sort of abstract thinking pattern and determines it's important. So from my testing, most of the time, it won't unnecessarily draw in context that it doesn't need because the agent's getting better and better at managing the context that it needs every time. That said, there's still a possibility that it can do so. And to mitigate that, what I'd suggest is just toggling it on when you need it. So notice how our prompt right now, we're specifically referencing that we need to look at a certain repository and extract code from it. Think of this as like one feature. Once we've finished this and we're happy with this, and now we want to build out a new page entirely unrelated to anything on GitHub, that would be when you can turn it off. So you don't need to have it on all the time. You just need to turn it on for when the agent is referencing that repository on GitHub.
Nice. And a second one,
Yep.
Notice that Will has several additional connectors available beyond the standard 9. It would be great to hear a few recommendations that have proven helpful.
Yeah, sure. Great question. So let's quickly look. Actually, you know what? I'll answer that in a sec. Let's just send this off because it's in plan mode right now so I can address that while we're talking. So here we go. Here's our plan. So we're going to extract 100 icons from the GitHub repo. Query, yep, it looks like they've found that all good. Filter to use 100 outline variant icons. So we've got a consistent visual style. We're going to persist the icons in the Bolt database. So we're going to put like the ID, name, slug, etc. It's all looking pretty good to me. So let's go ahead. There's no clarifying questions. And so with that, let's just go hit implement this plan. Great. Okay, so back into our connectors. Let's have a look. Notice that what we have here is when these are our default connectors. So Notion, Linear, Miro, Context 7, all of these up to shaders and Jira and perhaps ClickUp. These are all which have been added just by default within Bolt. Now, you'll notice that you'll see ShadCN UI and also tele.tv. These are MCP, these are custom MCP connectors that I've been able to add myself. To give you a little bit of context here, so basically, ShadCN is like a design system. So if you want like a date picker or something like that, they have all sorts of components that you can use that has like accessibility and responsiveness in mind. So instead of building these from scratch, a lot of the time these components will have weird edge cases, like February should only have 28 days. And like, instead of having to hard code all of that yourself, you can just bring that component from something like ShadCN. So ShadCN has their own MCP connector, and I connected that myself. Now, there's two different types of MCPs. There are local MCPs, and then there are hosted MCPs. Bolt only lets you connect hosted MCPs. So basically what that means is their server is sending out the information and you can receive it online. And so to connect it, you would just come into custom MCP, either choose transport type, and you can choose either server sent events or HTTP. You'll put in the URL, you give it a name. Sometimes they need authentication, and then you basically are now connected to their information source. And for example, if I want to implement a date picker, the Bolt agent speaks to ShadCN and basically determines exactly how to implement it, the code that needs to be written, and so it implements it in the correct way. Teller, this is like a screen recording app that I use, and they have an MCP that allows me to bring in the videos that I've created and bring in transcripts if I wanted to summarize them within a Bolt app or things like that. So you'll find, keep an eye out for these MCPs. They're becoming more and more popular. A lot of companies are starting to offer them so that you can interact with your data source. And if you're doing like a custom implementation of something, you may find a third-party service that offers an MCP that really helps with what you're doing.
One more, Will. I know you're.
Yeah, for sure.
Is a GitHub connector the right way to create the following stack? Bolt prototype / development, push to GitHub. GitHub pushes to Netlify with Supabase backend.
Wait, let me read this again. So Bolt prototype, development, and then you push that to GitHub, and then GitHub pushes to Netlify with the Supabase backend.
Yeah, sounds like a good way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Bolt has all of the publishing capabilities directly connected to Netlify, because we're using Netlify as our hosting provider. So instead of having to go through GitHub, you can think of GitHub as like a Google Drive for your code. It's just like a backup. It stores your code. If you need to fork it or share it with somebody else, it's a good kind of backup version of that. In this case, I don't think you'd need to connect to GitHub and then GitHub to Netlify, because you can manage your secrets directly within Bolt. You can publish directly from Bolt. We've dialed that workflow as much as possible so that you shouldn't be missing out on any key features along the way. So that's perhaps an unnecessary step. I think the main reason why we're connecting GitHub now is because we can use that as sort of our universal source of truth, where it stores all of our code, and then we can pull in components from each of our repos into the specific project that we're working on at the time. Okay, great. So we're working on this. It's having a look through the GitHub repository. While that's working, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and start with another project. So we'll create a component from scratch. Let me show you this is like another GitHub repo that I found that I want to share with you. So for example, this is called TanStack Table. It has 27,000 stars. It's been forked 3,500 times. And basically this is a very configurable table that allows you to adjust the table width, because in Bolt, if you ask for a table, for example, it will create the bare bones of the table. But if you wanted to, for example, adjust the width of each of the columns, then by default, it probably won't code that until you ask it to. If you want to add pagination at the bottom of the table or a button to jump to the last page of the pagination, again, Bolt by default probably won't add that unless you specifically ask it for. And if you think about the process of adding all of these features into a table, it may take up a good proportion of your time, several prompts, several tokens. So a way that we can fast track that is if we find an example of something that we really like online, we can then go ahead, create a fork of that, and bring that in directly within one prompt. So what I've done is I have already forked this ahead of time. Notice that it's saying this fork already exists. So I've already forked it to my account. I won't delete it and recreate it again because I think you're familiar with that process. But notice that the repo is called table. So we'll come into Bolt. Let's open up our connectors. Now you can see our GitHub has been, by default for a new project, is off because we toggled that off in the settings. And I guess just for this example, I'll turn the shaders one off as well. Shaders is a new connector that we've released recently. It allows you to basically bring in all these gorgeous moving backgrounds. It does require a membership, so I think it's about $15 a month. But once you bring a shader into your project and you publish it, I think you can unsubscribe. And if it's published live, it'll stay live. You just can't bring in new ones. So that's worth having a look around with as well. So here's our GitHub. We've got that on. Please use my GitHub connector and look at the repository called, and then I'm pretty sure it's just called table. Let me just double check this. Yep, table. Please understand the full functionality of this table, and using mock data, build a simple project that displays a table. Okay. So now let's go. I'm going to choose Opus 4.7 for this. We'll put it in plan mode and we'll generate that plan. Great. So we've got our table project building as well. Now there's something, I guess, if we want to take this to the next level, something that it will probably take 10 minutes or so for the Bolt agent to do. So I'm going to just try and start on this as early as possible, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to actually show how it works. Here is another example of a GitHub repo that I found. Somebody open sourced this and put it on Twitter and was like, hey, you don't need your typical teleprompter apps anymore. You can just use my open source version for free. So we went to his repo, had a look, and here in the README file, you can see there's a little video that it basically shows how it works. So we can see it's a teleprompter app that basically, as you speak, it marks off the words as done. Now, there's a bit of a caveat here. Have a look at the languages. We can see it's 99% written in Swift. So for those of you who are familiar with Swift, it's the language that we write native iOS apps in. So when you open a desktop app on your Mac computer, that's written in Swift. When you open a native app from the App Store on your iPhone, that's written most of the time in Swift. So this has been written as a native app for a desktop computer, which is a bit of a problem because Bolt, we use TypeScript and a bit of HTML and CSS under the hood. So let's see how well the agent is actually able to convert this project into a TypeScript project. So let's have a look. If I went and I clicked fork, you can see that I've already tested this out, and where it says text ream is the name of the repo. So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to jump back in and I'm going to create a new Bolt project. Okay, so let's go ahead, follow our same process. We'll turn on our GitHub connector for this, and let's go. We're going to choose Opus 4.7. Say, please use the GitHub connector to look at my, and then we're going to say text ream repository. Please understand the features of this app and convert this into a TypeScript project so that it is functional within Bolt. So we're asking the LLM to basically convert it and bring this now into a web app. Relatively simple prompt, but it's a big ask. Now we'll put this into plan mode and we're going to generate that plan. Okay, so this guy has got a little bit stuck. Let's see our GitHub's connector. Now, very occasionally this will happen. So sometimes if it does, I'm just going to hit continue. So what that'll do is whatever it had generated, sometimes it gets stuck in a little loop. I know it's pretty rare. You may have experienced it yourself. If you do, I usually just press stop and then continue, and then it will continue working from basically what it already had in the context. So we'll let that work. Let's have a look at our other Bolt project. Okay, here's the plan. This is the table project that we were working on. You can always look at the names up here. So table, let's see what it's doing. So interesting. It goes, I don't have access to a GitHub connector in my current tool set. I can only read local code base. Let's just make sure that this has been, geez, maybe I forgot to enable it there. So if that does happen, if you do make that mistake, just come in here and say, I have now enabled the GitHub connector, use that to create the plan. Okay, just double checking this. Yep, all good. And we'll build that off in plan mode. So we'll let that work. I hope all of these projects at the same time aren't too confusing. So bear with me. Here we can see that this plan has already completed for using the text stream teleprompter app. So it's going to convert the text stream app, Mac OS Swift, into web-based TypeScript. And so here we go. So once the teleprompter engine required login, I'll say not for now. Number 2, for direct or remote mode. So here we can already see it's kind of understanding some of the modes of the original Swift project. Do you want the original local WebSocket protocol preserved? Would require a backend edge function, a Bolt database, runtime based sync. We'll just go choose the simple option for now. And then 3, any preferred color palettes, you decide. Great, we'll turn it off plan mode and we'll send that off to build. Great. Let's have a jump in here, the table one. So now that we've enabled the GitHub connector, it basically, I search your GitHub account and I don't see the repository named exactly table. Your 45 repos include. So did you mean one of these or maybe, okay, so it's actually having a little bit of an issue finding the actual repo name. Maybe I used something else. So I'll jump back into GitHub, look at my repos. I'm going to sort this by last published. So here we go. So it is called table. So I can just click on this and I'm going to copy the URL, jump back in and say, here is the URL. And one other thing I want to check is that when you fork somebody else's repo, it does by default become public. So that's something for you to be aware of. Anyone can look at your GitHub profile and see that version, because remember, if you forked it, it is from somebody else's originally. So here is the URL. It is called table. So I've pasted that URL in there and we'll continue with the plan. Hopefully that's able to build it out. Let's see how this is going. Okay, so this is interesting. It's funny because just before this workshop, I tested with 100 icons and it didn't have any problem, but it seems like it's having a little bit of an issue. It seems like this is the second time it's stuck on 100 icons. Maybe that's a little bit too much to ask for.
How many tabs of projects do you have open?
I know, I've got a couple of tabs open as well, which may be something that's causing the issue. Yeah, maybe I'm getting a bit ambitious with running too many at the same time.
Like more and more icons.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see what this is doing. We're still building out this table. So here we go. I found the repo. It's a fork of this. Okay, great. So it's found the repo, which is what we want. No clarifying questions. Let's go ahead and implement this plan. Let's come back into, okay, so this is working. Now, what I want to show you again at the same time is basically so far what we've done is we've been able to bring in, well, we're in the process of bringing in components or features from other repositories into yours. But what if you want to basically copy and paste something from your project into someone else's? So to do that, what we need to do is basically connect your project to a GitHub repo. And so here we have the ability, just by clicking on our GitHub icon in the top right, this is where we can, I think because this is still working, it's like having a bit of an issue. I have done 4 tabs before, so I really don't hope this is too much of a problem. But basically, I can show you a project that I've been working on, little passion project of mine. It's wanting us to log into GitHub. Okay. So, okay, here we go. Here is our landing page. Look, we've got this like nice little onboarding flow, and this is the landing page, right? So speak your affirmations. It's this actually, and I was a project that I built from using that text stream project that we are in the process of forking and duplicating. Basically, the idea is that you can come in, read out affirmations, and using a teleprompter, it marks off the ones that you've read out. So if I wanted to connect this and create a GitHub repository out of it, if I haven't connected it before, once I've connected my GitHub account to my Bolt account, then basically I can just come up in here, click on this, and it'll open up a modal and it'll say create a repository from this Bolt project. You'll give it a name, press save, and it'll save it as a repository within your GitHub. Now, if I look in here, once you've done that process and you open up the GitHub status, you click on here and you can see that the name of this repository is term_swipe, and we're on the main branch. And you can actually see the full repo name here. And if you wanted to go to the repo, you can just click on this link directly. So let's have a look at like something quite niche in this project. So for example, here we can see, here's our see it in action section within the landing page. And notice what it is it has a variety of these different kind of like affirmations. These are, the text here is being drawn from the database, and then it's using this kind of like moving rectangle to move through and basically show the words at a specific amount of time. Now you can imagine to build a component like this, it may take a handful of Bolt prompts. It may take more if you're going into small detail. It may only take a few if you do it right. But regardless, to create a component like this does require back and forth iteration, and you can't just do it initially in one prompt. So I'm going to try and bring this entire section from this landing page into another Bolt project, just in one prompt. So let's remember it's called the see it in action section. And we've also got to remember this repo name. So what I'm going to do is just to copy that text so I get it exactly right, I'm now going to copy the URL. So I've got that. I'm going to close that, come into Bolt, and let's create another project. We should be okay. Well, let's have a look. So using the GitHub MCP connector, please look into the repository called term swipe. And then I'll say, here is its URL. So hopefully there's no uncertainty around the actual repo itself. Now, once we've pointed the Bolt agent at the actual repository, we need to tell exactly where to go inside of that. So inside this repository, there is a landing page. Within the landing page, there is a section called See It in Action. Please, and then I might even go one step further and explain this demonstrate how the affirmations work, and has an animated moving rectangle, full stop. I would like you to bring the full functionality of this section into a new project here within Bolt. Keep the styling the same. Great. If this section references the database, duplicate the database within this project so it works. Okay, great. Let's put this in plan mode and we'll generate our plan. Okay. Let's see how we're going. I heard prompt complete. Okay, so our tables is complete. Now, this is basically what we've done is we've gone to our TanStack repository and we've brought that in and we've created this table. So basically, we have done this effectively in one prompt. And if we look, if you've created tables in Bolt before, you may notice that if we've got something like this, like location, notice that these buttons actually work. And because we've brought in the full functionality of this, you can see that all of these niche little interactions, such as filtering by department, is something that works. We can also see how many rows per page. Again, that is something that has been built out. If you built out a table in Bolt, you'll notice that sometimes it will create these buttons, but it won't actually build out the functionality behind them, which I guess isn't a problem. It just means that you'll need to go and prompt that to be built for it to be fully functional. So let's have a look. We can also choose the columns that we're displaying as well. We can filter by status. And so basically what it's done is it's brought the full functionality of this table from that repository here into Bolt. So we can jump through the pages and even we can jump through to the last page of the pagination as an example, showing when it's updated as well. So there we go. We got our table working from that other repository in one prompt. Let's jump back in. Okay, we're having a little bit of an issue with the icons. What I will say is I did try with 100 icons before in another project and I got it working the first time. Obviously, we've tried it twice in this project and haven't got it working. So maybe the fact that there are 1,300 icons in that repository, and sometimes if it is like a large code base like that, it may have a little issue doing so. So maybe that wasn't the best example of what you can do. Let's come back in and look at our third example. So remember, this is the teleprompter app that was written in Swift. Now, before now, to convert one application from one coding language to another is a serious, serious endeavor. Now, we have pretty much been able to extract the features of that previously existing app, and we've been able to determine exactly the context of it and build out this version 1. So in one prompt, let's actually see how functional it is. So it looks like here we have, this is where we can create our sort of prompts on the left. We can delete it as well. So here, this is a test of the teleprompter app to see how well it functions. Okay, so we can go in there. We're adding our text. And now if we press start, look at this. This is a test of the teleprompter app. So I believe to actually get this text working, we'll need to connect to some sort of voice to text model. There are some kind of open source ones. You can use an API to do so by calling a server function. But what I wanted to point out is, although that full functionality of voice to teleprompter hasn't been built out, what it has done is, look, it's been able to kind of mirror functionality. And again, this was going from a completely different application that was written in Swift, and now it's brought it and made it into a semi-functional TypeScript Bolt project. And you can see that, it looks quite similar. If we jump back into, I don't know where the GitHub project is. Where is it? It was one of the text stream. I think it was this one. Yeah. Here you can see, if you look at that, the selected word is yellow. It's kind of got this microphone down the bottom. The written words are white. And by looking at, where are we? Here we go. Okay, so it's pretty much very similar. So it's done a great job, especially considering that it's converted from one coding language to another. So that's a great example of how, again, we've found an open source project and we've brought that here into our Bolt app. Now, this one, we've got to implement this plan. So I'll just go ahead and build this. I think this was our fourth example. And this is where we were trying to bring that see it in action animated affirmation card here into the landing page. So we'll let that build out and we'll give that a few minutes. Okay. Do we have any questions so far? I think just to cover a few things, I will point out that obviously, we've got two different ways we can treat this. One is we can find somebody's open source project out there on GitHub, and we can bring in features, functionality, components, whatever from their project into ours. Make sure that you're looking at their licensing and how if you're able to do it. If you do use them, make sure to reference them somewhere in your project if it is one of those MIT licenses. And then the other way that you can use it, which I guess we're demoing right now in this fourth project, is basically if you've already built out a component within your own project and you want to copy and paste that into another one of your projects. That's where you create a GitHub repository out of project A. And then once you've put it onto GitHub, you then in project B use this GitHub connector, make sure you reference the repository by name, and then you can bring in those features, functionality, whatever it may be, into your second project. So if you're building out, say, dashboards, you may be an agency and you're building out SaaS dashboards for some of your customers, whatever it may be, and you find yourself repetitively building the same things. Quick little interruption. During the workshop, we actually had a bit of technical difficulties where the microphone and the video dropped out at the very end of this stream. So that's why I'm interrupting you right now. What I've done is I've re-recorded the end of this so that you can watch the final part of the workshop. In the real workshop, I had to answer all the questions via chat, but here we are. We're going to go through and you can visually see the end of the workshop now. So what I'd like to show you first is the see it in action section that we were cloning from another repository is now live and working. And we can see we got this in one prompt. So here was our prompt using the GitHub MCP connector. Look at my repository called term swipe. Inside the repository, there is a landing page. Within the landing page, there is a section called see it in action. So we are extracting this see it in action directly from one of our other Bolt projects. Here's a live version of it. And so you can see exactly how it looks and how it operates. It's got these 6 different tabs up here, which reflect different decks or different affirmation cards, and the user can change between these, which changes the background. And notice how this rectangle moves and it adjusts its size depending on the next word that it's moving on to. So we can also change between each of these decks by clicking the side arrows. And this is in the live project this is the live GitHub repo. And here within Bolt, we've done that one initial prompt. You can see all of the thinking. We put it in plan mode first, where it extracted all of this information from the GitHub repo. Notice how specific I was. I explicitly said the repo by name. I said to go into the landing page and then go into the see it in action section. So it's gone through, it created all of this plan. It asked a few clarifying questions, which I then have gone to answer here. And then after that, in its first build, which you can see if we look at the version history, we've only got one version of it. It's now created this component, which is mirroring exactly the original repo. So it's done a great job copying and pasting an entire section with a variety of different components within it and bringing that into the new project. So that's a method you can use when you want to bring components from one into the other. Great. And now the second thing I'd like to touch on is I know we had a little bit of issues bringing in those 100 icon packs in the actual workshop itself. So here was a project where I went and I prompted it again for these icons. And if we look in here, it basically, I think, what was it? Icons. Here we go. Great. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So just that's a little caveat to pay attention to that. In this instance, it works straight away, but in the other instance that we demoed earlier on the workshop, it didn't work straight away. So there are some sort of context limitations that you need to be aware of. Sometimes it is a little bit of trial and error to get this working. The smaller the components that you're asking for, and the clearer your instructions are for how the agent can extract that code, explaining exactly where in the code base it is, the easier it's going to be for the agent and the higher accuracy it's going to have. Okay, so here we can see here are those 100 icons that we're able to bring in from another repo. So we can even outline these icons if we want, or we can view filled versions. So there we go, wrapping up this workshop. Again, for all of those who were there on the workshop itself, apologies for the technical issues that we had with the webcam and the audio dropping out right at the very end. But I hope that watching this recap now is a way that you can understand basically that these icons, they are working a little bit intermittently, but this is a great example of it's pretty much exactly mimicked the ability to bring in components from other repos directly into yours and bring in their functionality as well. So thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the workshop today, and look forward to seeing you all next week on Thursday. All right, bye.